for being a part of today's webinar. My name is Connie Owen, and I am the chair of the Kansas Water Authority. And welcome to our webinar, Kansas Water Partnering to Protect a Critical Resource. And I would like to sort of characterize this as possibly Water 101. This will present a general overview of some water issues, the main water issues in Kansas, and the top 3 state agencies that are charged with addressing them. If time allows, the presenters will answer questions when this is all over. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat feature. We will not have time to delve into specific issues or projects today, but I'm sure the speakers would all be happy to communicate with you directly following today's presentation, and their contact information will be provided. Also, this will be recorded, the presentation part. The question and answer part, however, will not be. So just so you know. Now, quick introduction to the program. I will give you a supremely brief overview. I'll mention the top issues, and then we will go on to the presentations. Kansas has water quality and quantity issues. Those 2 big categories. One is there enough to meet the needs of Kansas? The other category of issues is the water safe and clean? So the water quantity and quality. In general, our water comes from either surface water or groundwater. My first slide, please. In Kansas, there are 24 federal reservoirs. They were built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers or the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. All are in some state of silting in. This is called sedimentation. As the river flows into the reservoir, it deposits sediment. And over time, these sediments build up. Next slide, please. And the level of sedimentation means there's less room to store water, which is a really big problem when you realize that 2/3 of Kansas, 2/3 of Kansans get their drinking water from these surface water reservoirs. So they also provide capacity for flood storage. So that's another problem when the capacity is reduced by the reservoirs filling in with sediment. The other category of water that we have was surface water. We also get our water from groundwater sources. Next slide, please. The High Plains Aquifer, which includes the Algal Aquifer in Kansas, provides the water source for most of western Kansas. Western Kansas doesn't have the rain or the rivers to the extent that eastern Kansas does. Approximately 85% of water used in Kansas is used for agriculture, and most of that comes from groundwater. The Algal Aquifer is a non-renewable resource. In other words, there is more coming out, being used, than there is going back in. So over time, this has, of course, resulted in a reduced water level, less and less water. The water level is dropping farther and farther down. And as you can see on this map from the Kansas Geological Survey, where the areas are of the most intense water level change. And in some areas, the amount of water has decreased by as much as 60%. This is on track to continue. Nearly 40% of Kansas' economy is based on agriculture activities, whether livestock or crops or value-added agricultural products. And clearly, most of western Kansas relies, at least in part, if not in large part, on the viability of their groundwater supplies. A dry aquifer will have dire consequences for western Kansas. So these 2 big issues regarding water quantity, we have the reservoirs that are losing capacity, we have the groundwater levels that are diminishing in western Kansas. So turning from water quantity to water quality, next slide, thank you. In Kansas, let me see, did I get ahead of myself? I think I did. I'm just trying to be respectful of your time. I'm sorry I was late. There are water quality issues that exist all across Kansas. What you're looking at right now is a map of Kansas with the location of advisories for what are called harmful algal blooms. And these are blooms that take place in surface water bodies that produce toxins that are very dangerous to humans and animals. And it's something that is typically caused by chemicals that are released accidentally or from misuse of chemicals. This includes agricultural fertilizer. And next slide, please. Other related issues to these chemical releases are nitrate problems, these nitrate contaminations. And these violations, as you can see, occur in many different parts of the state. There's another category, next slide, that also shows additional chemical violations. And these come from the byproducts of actually treating water quality problems. So just at a glance, super speedy, you can see that we have water quality problems throughout the state, as well as water quantity problems throughout the state. The 3 state agencies, next slide please, that you will be hearing from, the Kansas Water Office, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and the Kansas Department of Agriculture are the 3 main agencies charged with addressing these issues. And in the most general sense, and you'll get much more specific detail from our speakers, in the most general sense, the Kansas Water Office is the policy planning coordination arm, and the Kansas Department of Environment's Division of Environment addresses water quality issues, and the Division of Water Resources within the Kansas Department of Agriculture addresses water quantity issues, and that the chief engineer is in charge of permitting the uses of water in Kansas. So in a super speedy way, I hope I haven't lost you all or confused you. Again, there will be questions, question time after all the speakers are finished. And let's turn to our speakers. I think we're beginning with Kara Hendricks, the Acting Director of the Kansas Water Office. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Connie. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, my name is Kara Hendricks. I'm the Acting Director with the Kansas Water Office. And as Connie mentioned, in the interest of time, I'll be brief and kind of give you an overview of what we do at the Water Office. So the agency was established in 1981, as Connie mentioned, as the Water Planning, Policy, Coordination, and Marketing Agency for the state. So what that essentially means is we do a lot of coordinating with agencies, with stakeholders, public, the legislature, all in the interest of water resources and water resource planning. We coordinate with the Kansas Water Authority, which is our governing board on the review of water laws, and make recommendations to the governor and legislature for any needed legislation to ensure that water policies and programs do address all the needs of Kansans. And our primary statutory function is the development and implementation of the Kansas Water Plan. For your reference, I know this is going to be recorded, so for reference, I included the statutes, the Kansas statutes that apply to our office. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of sort of how we're structured. I kind of touch on the 4 main parts there as part of our agency: the Kansas Water Authority, the public water supply programs, which includes reservoir operations, and 3 programs I'll touch on really briefly within that piece, because we are a state agency, but we also act as a public utility. Water planning is a big part of our charge, and that really includes the water plan development and implementation. And then we are responsible too for drought monitoring. We're part of the drought response team. So if you, next slide, please. So the Kansas Water Authority is within and a part of our agency. It's made up of 3 voting members who are appointed by the governor or legislative leadership. This is a map. It may be hard to see where you're sitting, but we do have this linked on our website. But it shows the current members and their interests, range in all different types of, there's public, surface water, groundwater interests, You can see there's a pretty good swath of representation across the state from west to east currently. The Water Authority also includes ex officio members that are state agency directors as part of that group. If you could, next slide, please. So on the public water supply programs, as I mentioned, we act as a public utility. The Water Office, on behalf of the state purchased storage in 14 reservoirs within the state. They're depicted here. You can see there's symbols that might be a little hard to see, but we have 3 programs that are administered through our agency with regard to this state-owned storage. The water marketing program, which is basically supports long-term water supply contracts for municipal and industrial users below the associated reservoirs. And you can see in green, there's little green triangles that show which reservoirs in the state participate in that program. So essentially that storage that was purchased by the Corps is then used to support contracts, and those are administered through our agency. We also have the water assurance program. That's a little bit different than the marketing program. That was enacted by statute in 1986. And the purpose of that program was to allow for a coordinated control of that state-owned storage within a basin below the reservoirs. And so members folks below that have water rights and that benefit from releases, that's really designated to satisfy downstream municipal and industrial water rights during drought conditions. So members of those districts participate, and the Water Office operates the reservoirs in order to coordinate releases when that assurance storage is needed by those districts. There are 3 districts. There's a Kansas Water Assurance District, a Meridazine Water Assurance District, which is shown there in green on the east side of the map there, and then the Cottonwood-Neosho Water Assurance District. And then finally, we have the Access District program, which is similar to the Assurance District, although it's voluntary, and it includes irrigation and recreational users in addition to the municipal and industrial users. Right now, there's currently 1 water supply district. It's the Lower Smoky Hill Water Supply Access District, and it's below Canopolis Lake there in the middle of the map there. And so a part of, just a highlight here on the public water supply programs, there's a lot of, our agency does a lot of coordinating with the Corps of Engineers to facilitate support of these programs for the storage that's within these reservoirs. Next slide, please. And then to round out the public water supply super overview of the public water supply program, this is our, we also have a model, our public water supply program comprehensive capital development plan. It's linked on our website, but this is really what we use. It's a financial model, long-term model. It accounts for all of the revenue and expenses of the program related to the public water supply storage that's owned by the state. And it's used to set the rate for the marketing program, the per 1,000 gallon rate, and that rate is approved by the Water Authority every year. So there's a significant amount of effort here in our long-term financial model to take into account expenses, which include purchase of the reservoir, as well as operation and maintenance that occurs at the reservoir on an annual basis at all those reservoirs. Next slide, please. So to touch on our water planning piece, as I mentioned before, our primary statutory charge really is the state water plan development and implementation. It addresses the current water resource issues in the state, and the idea is to plan for future needs. As Connie mentioned in her opening, the three major issues that it really focuses on is groundwater declines, particularly in the western part of the state. Reservoir sedimentation, as Connie mentioned earlier too, and how that impacts our water supply storage that I just talked about in terms of water supply, public water supply needs. And then water quality issues, also a concern. And so the water planning process includes a significant amount of public input and stakeholder involvement. And so as part of that, regional advisory committees. 14 groups across the state in different regions were formed, and they provide a significant amount of feedback on their local issues that they're facing within their regions, which, as you can imagine, across the state vary significantly, depending on the source of water and any specific local issues or interests they have. So it's really a grassroots approach in terms of their facilitating their input then to the water authority, and to ensure that all of those issues are being addressed as part of the water plan. And the water plan is really funded partially and primarily through the State Water Plan Fund. And our agency is really responsible for coordinating with the water authority, those RACs I just mentioned, and our other agency partners to develop the annual State Water Plan Fund budget recommendations necessary to implement that plan. Next slide, please. So I'll just list a few of the programs. Again, this is bird's eye view here, but these programs that are administered through our agency are aimed at, those water issues that I mentioned earlier. So we have our assessment and evaluation program. We assess water resource conditions statewide and regionally through that program, targeting technical assessments. We also leverage a significant amount of federal funding through that program, as we use funds through the Water Plan Fund to address or to work with the Corps and other federal groups on studies and initiatives focused on our issues. Technical water assistance to water users. Through a contract with the Kansas Rural Water Association, we provide technical assistance to small public water suppliers throughout the state. Support a stream gauging network. It's a cooperative agreement with the USGS. As you can imagine, stream gauging is very important to the reservoir operations we do, as well as administering not just our programs, but for drought monitoring and a lot of other necessary needs for that program. GIS database development. We continue to expand the GIS database coverage across the state. We have reservoir surveys and research as part of our agency. We have a bathymetry program that's essentially measuring the remaining storage in our lakes and our reservoirs, particularly in those public water supply reservoirs, to ensure that we are keeping tabs on the sedimentation rate, and we're planning for future needs by knowing exactly what we've got there. Sediment management is a huge need, and we have several programs that we work with other agencies and also within our own, but we're members of a stream bank stabilization interagency team. We're working at reducing sediment by addressing some of the stream banks above the reservoirs, and also work with the Corps and other agencies and partners to address reservoir sediment management by looking at some innovative ways to do that. We've done dredging in the past. You may be aware of the dredging project that was done out at John Redmond to remove sediment from that reservoir, but we're looking to other alternatives that may be more cost effective and sustainable, and so we continue that work. Next slide, please. And then just to round out a few more of the programs, we coordinate with partner agencies to facilitate cost share programs, really targeted at sediment and nutrients reductions in these different basins. Particularly, we have a program, the Kansas Reservoir Protection Initiative, that we work with other agencies on, as well as Milford Lake Regional Conservation Partnership Program that's targeted at Milford Lake and trying to reduce nutrients there, and the harmful algal blooms that are occurring there. The Republican River Water Conservation Project, those are funds that were awarded that were from non-compliance by Nebraska and Colorado in the water use in that area. And so we administer those funds on behalf of the state, and it's really going toward implementation in those areas within the Republican River Basin to try to benefit the water use there and conserve. And then we have a Water Technologies Farm program, which is very popular. It's a program that provides funding for producers, farmers to install and try new technologies, irrigation technology, conduct research, and support water conservation efforts by trying to keep their bottom line, support their bottom line, and maybe even increase it, but save and conserve water. Next slide, please. Education outreach is also a huge component of what we do. Recently, there was a campaign we worked with other agencies on to develop a Kansas Runs on Water website, which is really meant to be a one-stop shop for folks that want to learn more about water in Kansas and all of the different types of issues and concerns. And it's really an educational resource. So I encourage you, if you have a chance, the website is there to take a look at it. But it's really meant to get the word out on these issues and what folks can do to help. Next slide, please. Finally, mentioned we are responsible for monitoring for drought, which is obviously a very, very important charge here. We're responsible for coordinating the governor's drought response team, monitoring drought conditions, and notifying the governor when those conditions exist. So we're part of that team, and we continue those efforts and that charge. And then water conservation planning is a part of that. We assist, we have guidelines and templates for municipal water users or water municipalities that have public water supplies to work with us on water conservation plans and drought response plans to enable them to be a little bit more resilient in a drought. So I think that maybe, hopefully I didn't go too much over my time, but that's really a quick, in a nutshell, what we're doing at the Water Office. If you've got my information there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions when the other speakers are done. Thank you for your time.
All right, this is Leo Henning. I am the Deputy Secretary and Director of Environment for the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. I've got a short presentation here on water quality programs and initiatives in our division. It's hard to cover all this in 15 minutes, so this is going to be a very high-level discussion. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the division, just so that we're all on the same footing. The Division of Environment is equal or equivalent to the federal United States Environmental Protection Agency. The Division of Environment implements about 95% of all the federal environmental rules in the state. And Congress intended states to implement most of the federal rules when they were promulgated. So EPA has delegated the environmental programs to Kansas, but they actively review and audit our programs. If the environment staff does not implement the program per the federal requirements, EPA can take unilateral actions against any facility that is under our jurisdiction. And if we have a complete failure of the program, they can take the programs back from the state. We implement all the rules for protection of water quality. The program is highly regulatory. It sets out standards, plus the monitoring, inspection, compliance, and enforcement requirements. The state must be as stringent as the federal rules. Again, sometimes I am questioned as to why is environment in the health department. The reason is environmental laws were and are ultimately for the protection of human health. Our job is to ensure the water we drink, the air we breathe, and the land we live on is safe. So here's the first slide, and this is a list of the federal rules that we implement. Most of these laws are 40 to 50 years old. So the programs are well understood by the regulated community. The state revolving loan program, which is the third one there, is not a federal rule, but is a large program within our Bureau of Water. And the last bullet there, which is the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act, is a Department of Interior program which addresses coal mined areas in the state. Next slide. So we're first going to talk about the Clean Water Act, which applies mostly to surface water quality. The Clean Water Act provides a system to determine what the use of the stream is or should be. Based on what the stream should support, a set of standards for the quality of the water in the stream is established. DOE actively monitors the water bodies to have the data to show we are meeting standards. If we are not meeting standards, the stream is listed as impaired and then put on the what they call the 303D list with EPA. If a stream is impaired, the Division of Environment is responsible to put a plan together which brings that stream back into compliance. We do that through a process called total maximum daily loads that establishes loading rates for that stream from the regulated sources or point sources. Facilities that are discharging to a stream must have an NPDES permit or a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit to discharge. If a stream is impaired, Environment must require the facility to lower their discharges to the stream so that the stream can meet standards. So that talks about facilities that have a point discharge, which is kind of water coming out of a pipe and being discharged into a stream. We also have a program to help with non-point source pollution, which are primarily agricultural sources. The program is the Watershed Restoration and Protection Strategy, or RAPS program. This program targets landowners to implement best management practices to reduce runoff from agricultural fields. RAPS projects are targeted in watersheds that are impaired to help bring those streams back into compliance with the surface water quality standards. Non-point sources are those are not regulated under the Clean Water Act, but Environment works with producers who voluntarily agree to reduce their contribution to the impaired streams to improve water quality. The next slide, please. The next federal law that we implement is the Safe Drinking Water Act. The Safe Drinking Water Act is a law that establishes criteria for the drinking water systems in the state. It provides standards for the water that is consumed and the monitoring, reporting, and operational requirements for the drinking water systems. In the state, generally, the western portion relies on groundwater for drinking water, and the eastern part of the state relies mostly on surface water for drinking water. We have 979 public water well systems in Kansas, of which 91% of the public water systems comply with the health-based standards. Inversely, that means that there's about 9% of the systems that do not meet the standards. And this is the area that the Division of Environment spends most of its time trying to get those facilities back into compliance. Another small part of the Safe Drinking Water Act is the underground injection control program, which regulates the injection of fluids into the underground rock formations. Environment has been dealing with increased seismic activity in the state due to increased volumes of water injected into the Arbuckle Formation, mostly down in south central Kansas. We in Environment regulate the injection of fluids from industrial sources, and the Kansas Corporation Commission regulates the disposal of brine from oil and gas operations. So that's the distinction there between how injection into the Arbuckle is regulated between the two agencies. Next slide. This is what I mentioned earlier about the state revolving loan program. Division of Environment provides low interest loans to municipalities or drinking water systems to expand, repair, or upgrade their wastewater treatment facilities or their drinking water facilities. And that includes the piping for those facilities. Most notably, recently, Environment released its first loan to the city of Wichita for their new drinking water facility. we anticipate we will ultimately provide around $500 million of funding for that drinking water project. So drinking water, we've had 345 loans and have committed almost $900 million for drinking water systems. For wastewater treatment systems, we have over 500 loans at $1.4 billion. Next slide. Okay, a little bit about our contaminated site programs. I've included some slides on the environmental cleanup programs. The reason is we have hundreds of contaminated sites in the state, and most of those have impacted groundwater. Most of the sites are contaminated with petroleum products from mostly gas stations, but we have had petroleum contamination from refineries, storage facilities, and pipeline breaks. We also have many sites contaminated with other contaminants, and they range from arsenic to zinc. There are many sites with many different contaminants. The two main environmental acts for these contaminated sites is the Comprehensive Environmental Response and Liability Act, also known as CERCLA, and also known as Superfund. And the other federal act is the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. The reason for the two acts is they address different facilities based on when the contamination occurred. Superfund was established to address contamination from historical sites, and RCRA was really established to prevent further contamination from facilities that use hazardous waste. But there is a cleanup portion to RCRA for facilities that operate and continue to operate. So under these programs, we have a memorandum of agreement with the EPA to address contaminated sites. The MOA defers cleanup and oversight of non-NPL sites to KDHE. And in the RCRA program, there are two programs under the RCRA program, which is the Corrective Action Program and the Underground Storage Tank Program here, which regulates the petroleum tanks. Next slide. First, a little bit about Superfund. Superfund sites are those sites that are on the National Priority List, also known as the NPL. And EPA is the lead at those sites. And the largest and most expensive Superfund site in Kansas is the Cherokee County Superfund site in the very southeast portion of Kansas. This is a picture of some of the mine waste there. It is contaminated from historical mining activities for lead, cadmium, and zinc. The site has contaminated surface water, sediments in the streams, and groundwater. Environment provides technical assistance to EPA for Superfund sites in the state. I also had mentioned earlier the surface mining section, and DOE regulates the coal mining and performs restoration actions at coal mining sites or strip mines under the Federal Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. This action improves water quality by treating acid mine water from the coal mining areas and also plugging shafts to keep surface water from infiltrating into the old coal mined areas. Next slide. Just want to talk a little bit about the state lead programs. These are the sites that are under KDHE's management and not EPA. They're deferred from EPA through that MOA that I talked about earlier. I mention these because almost all these sites have impacted groundwater. DOE is the lead regulatory agency, and our staff are actually responsible to clean up many of the sites, because there are trust funds established that we use to clean them up. The sites typically follow the same process as a Superfund site, but we can get to cleanup actions faster and less expensive than as if it were a Superfund site. Some of the programs you might have heard of are listed here. Some of these have trust funds and provide funding to address the contamination. the dry cleaner and orphan sites, and then the underground storage tank programs. There are also programs that there are responsible parties to clean up the sites, and so therefore state money isn't used to clean them up. And those are the state cooperative program and the voluntary cleanup program. And then there's a federal program that we have an agreement with the Department of Defense to provide oversight of cleanup at all the federal facilities in the state. The last slide I have, next, is I just wanted to add a little bit about redevelopment programs. A lot of these sites are contaminated, and we're having a hard time being redeveloped because of the stigma of being contaminated. So this is a list of different programs that we have to try to bring those contaminated sites back into productive use. I'm not going to read them. You can read them. Run out of time. So that was my last slide. So thank you for allowing me the time. What I try to accomplish in this discussion is to demonstrate how closely we work with EPA and their oversight and supervision of the environmental programs, that we must comply with the federal rules. These programs are highly regulatory and for implementing the federal standards and requirements, and that they are mature programs that have been around for, like I said, 40, 50 years. So they're pretty well understood by the regulated community. So with that, I will stop. I've used up all 15 minutes, and I'll take questions at the end.
Thanks, Leo. I'll take it from here. My name is Earl Lewis. I'm the Chief Engineer at the Department of Agriculture's Division of Water Resources. I'm going to cover the KDA's programs, and I'll try and be fairly brief here so there's a little bit of time for questions. Get the opportunity to back clean up, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to each of you here today. Let's go to the next slide. There's two divisions within Department of Agriculture that have some bearing on water. I don't oversee the Division of Conservation. You can see Andy Lyon's picture there. Andy is the head of that division. And you will hear some about the Division of Conservation in the legislature each year. DOC works with conservation districts, watershed districts, a lot of the local units of government to improve water quality, reduce soil erosion, conserve water, and reduce flood and those type of issues. Their main act legislatively was in 1937 with the Conservation District Act, where there's 105 different conservation districts across the state, one for each county, and they're overseen by a state conservation commission. There's a Watershed District Act in 1953 that both Division of Conservation and my division, Division of Water Resources, have some say in. And again, there's 75 watershed districts, and you might think of those as if you're driving across the countryside and see some of those larger ponds, small lakes, those are really watershed district lakes that are focused on reducing flood control. DOC also covers the Kansas Ag Liming Materials Act from 1976, the Multi-Purpose Small Lakes Act, which is kind of a build-on for the Watershed District Act that went into place in 1985. And then finally in 1994, they picked up the Surface Mining, Land Conservation and Reclamation Act. And that is an act that deals with a lot of the sand and gravel pits, or some of the pits such as down in southeast Kansas for old coal mining pits, to try and get those back into a better shape and not just have folks walk away from them. DOC is funded from the Waterplain Fund, General Fund, and fee funds. If we go to the next slide, which you'll hear quite a bit about in DOC in the legislature is a lot of the state water plan funded programs. DOC gets almost half of the state water plan fund and feeds that out again through those conservation watershed districts. And you see there the list of a number of the programs that show up in the state water plan fund. But some of the big ones being aid to conservation districts, water resource cost share, stream bank stabilization, and then the watershed dam construction. One more I might point out is kind of hard to understand what it is, but water tap CREP right there in the middle of that list is water transition assistance and conservation reserve enhancement. And that's a program in which we partner with with USDA to help farmers convert irrigated property into dryland crop property where they can still farm it, hopefully, but be able to reduce our draw on those aquifers. Let's go to the next slide. So we'll move over to the Division of Water Resources, and again, that's the division that I oversee within Department of Agriculture, and there's a number of statutes. In fact, there's 30 different laws that have some tie into our division, and we'll cover a few of those going forward. Again, just in the interest of time, I think we'll have these available for you, but I won't go through all that in detail on this slide. So let's go on to the next one. So organizationally, we're broken up into 3 different programs. Our Water Appropriation Program, which manages our state's water rights system and a lot of the issues that go along with the Appropriation Act or the management of our water supply. Our Water Management Services, which is our technical services arm, and then also helps with our interstate water issues, and I'll come back to that here in just a minute. And then Water Structures Program, which regulates dams, stream obstructions, levees, floodplain fill, those type of things, as well as the National Flood Insurance Program. And again, I'll come back to that here in just a minute. So let's go to the next slide, please. Water Appropriation Program is managed by Lane Letourneau, and you see his picture there. The biggest piece of the Water Appropriation Program, in a lot of ways, the foundation for our water supply laws in the state of Kansas, is the Water Appropriation Act from 1945. That really is a first in time, first in right system that any water user other than domestic that uses any quantity of water across the state has to get a water right under that appropriation system. In 1972, there was a Groundwater Management District Act put in place that helped to bring some local feedback and control into that. Water Plant Storage Act, I think Kara might have mentioned that in her comments. There's some crossover with the water office there. Water Transfer Act went into place in 1983 and could be an issue that we end up dealing with here in the near future as the cities of Hayes and Russell look to transfer some water from Kinsley area up to Hayes and Russell area. So that's about a 70-mile transfer, and there's some additional requirements that go in place when you have Water Transfer Act. So let's go to the next slide. So again, just a little bit more on the Appropriation Act. Again, first in time, first in right. What that really means is that we operate a system of water rights that the folks that got their water right first, or the oldest water rights, have the first opportunity to use water when there's not enough to go around. It limits the amount of water that can be used to a reasonable amount, so we try and be very conservative and make sure that folks aren't wasting water. And again, we've got 4 field offices across the state in Garden City, Stafford, Stockton, and Topeka that help to work with property owners to make sure that these property rights, these water rights, are managed correctly and that we protect people's investments. Next slide. There we go. So think about the different beneficial uses. Obviously, irrigation is the big one, but stock water, industrial, municipal, industrial, recreation. The map there on the bottom is what we often refer to as a Pac-Man chart, and it shows where the majority of the water is used. So there's a pie chart for each county there. The size of the pie chart shows you the general amount of water that's used relative to other counties. And then the colors show you what the dominant use is. So that light blue is primarily irrigation, our red is municipal, and the yellow is industrial. And of course, some other minor uses. But you can see where the majority of water use is in the state of Kansas, in Southwest, South Central, and then Northwest. And then, of course, you can see our biggest municipal uses, Sedgwick, Wyandotte, Johnson, Shawnee, those counties. Again, I'm not telling you stuff that you would necessarily know, but sometimes it's good to see those maps and be able to kind of put it in perspective in your head. Let's go to the next slide. Chris Badel manages our water management services. And again, a lot of the work that we do in support of some of the other programs or support of our citizens technically, whether that's modeling, whether that's working some of our technical evaluations of different groundwater areas or surface water areas, is done within his shop. But the other thing that gets a lot of attention in the legislature and elsewhere is interstate agreements. We have compacts with Oklahoma, Colorado, and Nebraska on 4 different rivers that cross our boundaries. And those compacts are state law and they're also federal law. And actually just this last week, earlier this week, we finished up an annual compact meeting on the Kansas and Colorado Ark River Compact Commission. And so we meet at least once a year with each of those folks to make sure that all states are in compliance with the compact obligations. And if we need to work on some of the issues, which we often do, that's a forum to try and resolve issues before we have to hopefully not go back to the Supreme Court on some of those things. But those interstate compacts really dictate how each of those states can use water and not harm the other states. And so they're pretty important for our users. As you can see, we're an upstream state when it comes to the Kansas-Oklahoma compact, but we're downstream states for the others. So we've got to be very careful about that. Let's go to the next slide. Water Structures, and Terry Medley is our program manager there. And again, think of anything that can change the channel or put something in the channel or the floodplain. A lot of those things have to be permitted under Kansas law. And this goes back to 1929 with the levee law and the obstruction of streams. And a lot of our dams really fall into that obstruction of streams. And again, a Watershed District Act in the 50s and then floodplain zoning in the 1990s. So we cover a lot of ground, literally and figuratively, when it comes to our streams and our floodplains in our structures program. Let's go to the next slide, please. Just to give you some scope of that, there's about 6,000 dams, a little over 6,000 dams in the state of Kansas that show up on the National Inventory of Dams. A little over 2,500 of those are regulated by the state. 258 of those are high hazard. And the hazard class really doesn't mean that they're in bad shape. It really refers to what's downstream of those dams. Are there houses? Are there roads? Are there people that could be impacted if that dam failed? And so there's higher level of monitoring and higher level of requirements that go along with those higher levels of dam classifications. But we have folks that work with the owners of those dams to make sure they're in good shape or regulate them if they're not. We also have, again, if you're going to be building a levee along the streams of any size, then that has to be permitted. Or if you're going to be putting floodplain fill in such that you're going to increase the level of water during a 100-year flood, all of those things have to be permitted as well. Let's go to the next slide. Excuse me. In 1991, again, our floodplain law went into effect. We've got 455 communities that participate in the National Flood Insurance Program, and that's managed through the Division of Water Resources. We've got about just under $2 billion in property that's covered through that program and have paid out almost $88 million in damages. And so these things go together. We do have a floodplain mapping program so that if you're in a community or a city of any size, and the majority of our counties have floodplain maps that show the areas that really folks shouldn't be building in, because if we get into a significant flood, that ground's going to be underwater and that property is going to be damaged. And so that's a program we work with FEMA on as well, to try and make sure that we're informing those communities of who's in danger. And then ultimately our goal would be to try and limit development in that area or move folks out of that area. So we limit life exposure as well as property damage. And I think we'll go with the next slide, which is just our contact information. If you want more information, you can go to the Department of Ag's website under Division of Programs, Division of Water Resources. And with that, I will stop and be happy to try and answer questions. I know it's pretty fast, but sure appreciate everybody's time and interest today. We want to help you understand how we all work together.
Okay, this is Connie Owen again, and I would like to thank all of our speakers that were here today. We have a little bit of time if anyone has any questions.